Hi, everybody. Hope you're well. Thank you for joining today's session. We will just give it another minute, if that's okay with everybody, before we begin, just to allow sufficient time for people who haven't joined yet be able to make it in time. Hi, everyone, again. We have a great webinar today for you, so thanks for joining and taking our time today. My name is Sulabh Jain, and in my role here at Tellus as the head of product, I work with customers and partners on a daily basis on Microsoft Teams. Today, I'm also joined by Peter Vincent, who is one of the specialists in the modern workplace practice, and I'm very much looking forward to our discussion. A bit of housekeeping to begin with. You are all on mute. So please ask any questions you have during the session in the Q&A tab in the box to the right. We will come to these at the end of the session, and we have reserved plenty of time for that. So rest assured, all of the questions will be answered. So today's topic of discussion is about effective governance on Microsoft Teams. And the reason why we thought of having this discussion is because governance is not always the first thought that comes to mind when you've been tasked with rolling out Microsoft Teams to as many people as possible in your business as quickly as possible. It is, however, critical. And if you neglect to implement proper governance measures for Microsoft Teams, we found that you'll have at best a mess of teams created, or at worst, some legal troubles to deal with. We're finding this on a daily basis with customers who've had a reasonable to strong adoption on Teams, but are having challenges in effectively governing the platform. So today, Peter will talk us through some of these key areas you need to consider, like how you get started with governance, who do you need to talk to, what settings and tools you need to consider to meet the governance needs, and how do you all pull it together. So in today's discussion, we will cover why is governance on Teams important and what's the impact of not having governance in place. How can you implement effective governance and key considerations when planning and implementing governance? And lastly, we'll walk you through Tellus, which is a governance and management tool for Teams that customers have been using to solve some of the governance issues. And we'll then go through any questions and answers that the audience have. So to begin with, as many of you already know, Teams is a hub for communication and collaboration. It has a range of key capabilities, starting with chat. It has a lot of great chat features, but basically promotes informal communication and collaboration between employees and saves a lot of time, but also saves emails. Teams have meetings, so where you can set up meetings like these, and you can share screens, you can do whiteboarding sessions and have more productive and efficient meetings. Teams has calling capabilities. Increasingly, organizations are taking up this feature, where they're replacing their desk phones with soft phones now. It has a lot of call center type capabilities as well, which allows you to take the calling experience to a whole new level, especially with help desks and those kind of teams. Teams have a collaboration function, which makes basically sharing information such as files and documents very easy. and makes everyone more productive. Files are now just one click away from your communication. So rather than using emails in Outlook, you can, and files on Network Share, you can actually use you can share files very, very easily in Teams to be able to share information. And lastly, apps. You have the ability to add a lot of apps through the Teams App Store. That allows you to integrate your business processes with Teams, and you can do them in a number of ways by adding either apps, or you can add forms, workflows, or bots to actually help you streamline your existing business processes. So Teams is not only being used for basic collaboration and communication capabilities. Your Teams is now becoming a key platform for solving business problems and providing business solutions to customers. So first thing to note when thinking about Teams governance is that it has a number of interrelated workflows. For example, content is saved from an e-discovery and retention perspective in Exchange Online. Files or emails shared in a channel are stored in SharePoint Online. And files that you store in a one-on-one chat or a group chat are actually stored in OneDrive for Business. There are a range of various different workloads that come into play. These are the three prominent ones, but there are actually other workloads that come into play. For example, if you're doing Teams meeting recordings, that's now being made available through Stream. And if you have voicemails that are being used, that's going through users' mailbox and so on. But these are the three critical workloads that are used on a day-to-day basis, I'll say, when you are actually saving information in Teams. The other thing to consider is that there are a range of different apps available in the App Store. They range from Microsoft apps such as Stream, Microsoft Forms, OneNote, Planner, Power BI, and so on, to third-party apps such as maybe Trello if you use it, or Jira. Developers might be using that, DevOps, YouTube, or whatever it may be. You also can actually develop your own app based on your specific needs. So you can either use some templates that are available as open source, or you can actually get professional organizations like us, or if you have in-house developers with appropriate capabilities, then you can even get them to actually develop custom apps for you, depending on what your business needs are. And these can vary in complexity as well. The key point here, though, is that Teams cannot be looked at in isolation. We need to have a more holistic view when looking at governance on Teams, because if one of these apps don't work for the end users automatically think it's Teams that is not working for them, and that's very, very natural. The other thing to consider is that ultimately you are storing your data in all of these apps. So your data is not just stored in Teams and not just in the interrelated workflows like Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, but also in numerous different apps that are being used in so many teams that are being used out there. So let's start with understanding why is governance on Teams important? And so joining me now to answer this question and many other related questions our customers have is Peter Vincent. Peter is one of our senior consultants, like I said before. Peter's been working in Office 365 since its inception and has nearly 15 years experience working on Microsoft technologies. Peter is one of our experts in Teams implementations and works on many challenging projects with customers on the ground. Peter, thank you for joining. I know you're very busy, so we appreciate you taking the time out today for agreeing to share your insights and experiences on Teams governance. So Peter, I'll start by asking you, why is governance on Teams important?
Thanks, Philip. The point of having governance in Teams is to empower your staff to do work in a safe, sustainable, and scalable way. We want our data to be secure, but not to the point where the systems handling that data are a hurdle in themselves. The effort in maintaining teams should be distributed rather than a solely IT task, as it's commonly been in the past. And teams should be created in a standardized fashion to minimize the overheads in maintaining your new environment. Microsoft's default state for teams is that anyone can create a team. We'll get to the pitfalls around that in a moment. But a point I'd like to make is that governance isn't always about limiting or removing things. It's just as much about showing people what they can do and where they should be doing it.
Sorry, just needed to come off mute there. So thanks for that, Peter. Appreciate that. Thanks for that solid overview. Peter, can you help us understand what happens when organizations don't have governance in place? And in simple words, what can go wrong? And then, what do you need to get it right?
Well, simply put, without governance, you'll end up with a mess that no one knows how to sort out. To get it right, there are lots of ways to look at it, but I find the simplest is requirements, rules, and technology. Know your business inside and out. Define the rules or redefine old rules around your systems and content, and choose the mechanisms for facilitating those rules. That is, automate and standardize where possible, so that the only manual steps are checkpoints rather than entire processes. What you don't want, I like this list. If any user can create teams without supervision or oversight, what's to stop people creating the same team twice? Maybe once with an acronym and another with the full name. Without the oversight, teams will be created in a non-uniform manner with duplication and inconsistent categorization, leaving users lost as to where they should be doing their work. Further to that, when people create teams, what's happening in the background is they're generating shared inboxes and calendars in Exchange, new permission groups in Active Directory, SharePoint sites, and so on. This effectively dilutes the company's digital workspace and rapidly adds to what the IT department has to maintain in the background. Most importantly, the company's data can be exposed if the appropriate security measures aren't put in place for each new team. What this leads to is a lack of effective use of the platform, a team's explosion and people getting lost. Staff struggle to find information in a timely manner, scrolling up and down through hundreds of teams that they're a member of. And the company opens themselves up to security risks and vulnerabilities, with content being shared in an uncontrolled manner with external parties. Ultimately, this will increase your costs, either to do with the use of the platform or possibly loss of income caused by sending a wrong version of a quote or an invoice, something I've seen a fair bit of. Data can get lost. Sharing information in an unsecure way may mean that your competitors get hold of your IP, or perhaps private customer data is exposed. If users are frustrated with finding information, they might turn to using shadow IT. And what happens when that staff member leaves the company? They take your data with them. And the overheads in maintaining teams will increase more and more over time. Without the standardization, everything will be a one-off, meaning it's difficult to group teams as the same type or retrospectively apply rules across the board.
Thanks for that, Peter. That's a very, very comprehensive overview. So do you mind sharing some real world examples from, you work with customers day in, day out, and I'm sure you've got many anecdotes or many examples of customers, and feel free to, and please don't name the customers, but we just want to share some examples that you're seeing in the real world out there that basically explain to these points.
Okay, sure. I've got loads. I'll see if I can think of a handful of different types. Yeah, I won't name names, but yeah, these are real scenarios that we've come across. A new company starts up, and within 6 months, they've already got 1,100 teams. It sounds a lot, but it actually happens. There was a school with teams created at different levels. So, for example, geography or build class or all of year 7. Geography for what year and what does build teach? We've come across divergers, a company splitting in 2 with no way to divvy up their content without eyeballing each file individually. No idea how many teams they had. They ended up having thousands. No indication of which users were using each team. There's both sides of the fence were using each team, and that ended up in them splitting teams down the middle, adding a lot of complexity to their migration and dragging out the timeframes. Another one would be a company who wasn't using Teams. Everyone was working out of their OneDrives with no overview or visibility for management. So that's a bit of an oddball, that one, but it happens.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Peter. Again, very, very interesting and different examples. It's very interesting to see that the more and more conversations we are having now with customers, security of information is becoming paramount. And when we started initially, a lot of the data stored in Teams is still going to SharePoint. But when Teams didn't exist, a lot of the content was actually going in SharePoint, and organizations started to actually take a note of that and started to put mechanisms to actually secure that information better and have proper information classifications and related rules, etc. to it. Teams came in, and then obviously COVID hit, and then Teams went gangbusters. And organizations are now realizing that they have, because you can so easily share information on Teams, and you can add guests and different kind of settings where you can have external collaboration happening, and you can nearly willingly go and create any number of teams. And because, like I said before, Teams has so many interrelated workloads, the risks of actually losing information from a security perspective is now increased more than ever. And also, at least my discussions with customers, I'm finding that the administrators are, having to deal with this, like you mentioned, Pete, like 1,100 teams created in a matter of months. How do you deal with this? How do you get on top of this? And how do you even start? So there are a number of challenges now organizations are facing because Teams has been successful for them in a way where they've got a good, strong adoption, but now the issues are around how do we manage the platform? How do we ensure without losing any productivity? How do we enable our staff to do what they're doing, but to probably do more with appropriate checks and balances in place? And that's a fundamental issue most customers are facing these days. So let's continue, Pete. What do you need to implement successful governance in place? What are some of the key ingredients for implementing successful governance?
Okay, well, going back to those 3 points before, you need requirements. You need to know your business, the type of content that it has, and who's responsible for it, rather than delegating the responsibility to the IT team because it's an IT system and they should look after things. The rules are around that content. So these are policies or procedures that your business wants to follow, whether they're just internal or they're industry-wide. And the technology, know the mechanisms that are available to implement those rules. Now, at first glance, it might seem like this webinar is all about that third point, knowing the mechanisms to implement the rules. But the first 2 are often overlooked, and it's crucial to get those right before attempting the third. Even if you already work in the cloud, it's worthwhile going over those first 2 points to make sure that they're up to date with the way that we're all working now. So let's dig into that in a little deeper. For requirements, what are the high-level areas of your business? Departments, projects, ELT, products, customers, extranet, the list goes on. What are all those areas? The content in those areas can be grouped and categorized differently. So it's important to know what those categories are and to make sure that you confirm them with each of the areas so everyone's on the same page. Is the area in a particular, is the content in a particular area only for internal use? What can be shared outside your company? If content can be shared outside, is it only with named individuals, or is that content effectively public knowledge and you don't mind who sees it? Who are the decision makers? These are people that may not be at the coalface, but they have the right knowledge to make the best decisions about their area's content. In defining these roles, it may mean that staff have their job descriptions amended with these new responsibilities. It's important that these roles are taken seriously and are not just afterthoughts. These responsibilities don't need to be onerous. It might just be clicking approve for a request that comes in for a new team. But it's key to the platform's success. And lastly, who are your end users? Are all your staff in the office, or is some on the road or in a warehouse? What kinds of content does each person want to put their hands on? How will they be getting to it? Is it on a mobile on the road or perhaps a shared kiosk in a warehouse? All of these things are requirements that your business needs to get right before moving on to implementing any of them. Next are rules. This is creating or adopting the appropriate processes based on your organization needs. So creating teams, is this self-service for all? Is it self-service for a select group of users, or is it controlled through a request form and approval workflow? Archiving and deletion, how long does a team live for? What happens to a team after it's served its purpose? We don't want them sticking around forever. We need to clean up the environment as we go. External guest access. Which teams need external users? How is the content being shared? Are files shared just by themselves, or do the external parties need access to the team's chat interface? So these can be done independently of each other. What policies do you have and naming conventions? These make it easier to identify teams at a glance. Message settings, you can restrict the use of emojis, GIFs, install language filters, perhaps for those externally accessible teams. What apps can be used, if any, in a particular team? And can private channels be created? So these are just some of the things that we can control around teams, but we need to have business rules in place so we know what we're achieving when it comes to implementing. Data security, how do you classify your content? If we know how content's classified, we can apply blanket security and retention rules. Without the ability to distinguish between different types of content, that process can only be done by looking at each piece of content, each thing individually. So it's important to classify things even at a high level. And lastly is that technology point. Microsoft have a number of configuration settings that you can use immediately, most notably turning off the ability to create teams across the board, with the exception of nominated gatekeepers. This is something we advocate quite strongly that companies do if they haven't put this in place already. Closely followed is the disabling of anonymous access when sharing files. On templates, teams can be created from other teams, or they can be created using predefined templates. Setting up these templates that are specific to your company relies on a solid understanding of the requirements and rules mentioned earlier. There's no out-of-the-box way of handling approvals for teams. I'll let Sulabh get to this a little bit later. As for a report of teams that are available to join, the only way to see these is by running a search in the Teams application. That is, unless you're an admin with access to the backend master list. Just to put that in to a common use case. Let's say I want to create a team for a project. The first thing I should do is check if that team already exists. But I can only guess at what that team might be called, as I don't have a complete listing of teams. I've only got search, so I just type in what I think it could be called and keep doing searches. There's no way to see all of the project teams without being a member of all of them. Obviously, this isn't ideal because you'd be scrolling for some time in teams to find the right one. So if I decide that there's no existing team and that I should make a new one for this project, is there a template for me to use, or maybe I'll just base this on an existing team, which may or may not have all of the proper channels, apps, and settings for a project? So with that, I think it might be a good time to hand things over back to Sulab to talk about how that can be handled.
Thank you, Peter. Very, very useful information there, and very some of the insights you shared I found really, really interesting. One of the things I think you mentioned that caught my attention was the guest, the external the guest setting. That setting is on by default, where you can go and add guests. Anybody can go and add guests. But I think very few customers realize that you can actually control that at a tenant level. You can apply policies for it, so you can actually control which teams can actually have guests, ability to add guests on and not. And again, it catches a lot of the customers by surprise that you have those kind of flexibility and those controls built in. You just need to, like you said, you just need to think about the rules and your requirements and what are you trying to accomplish. So thank you for that, Peter. Much appreciated. So Peter talked about three key ingredients: requirements, rules, and technology. Whenever we are having a conversation with the customer about teams, often there is a gap between what technology can do out of the box and what the business needs are and what you can accomplish through policies and processes. And this is where Tellus comes in and has been helping customers fill that gap. So very simply, Tellus provides an ability to manage and govern teams. It is not an answer to every single governance requirement you have. I would say it's a very solid starting point, but also helps organizations solve a lot of the fundamental governance issues with teams relatively quickly without having to boil the ocean. And the key thing with governance is that we don't want it to be onerous. We want to keep it simple. And we want to make sure we are enabling our staff do more with appropriate checks and balances. So let me just walk you through some of the key things or key capabilities that customers find are really, really useful with Tellus. The first thing is that it's built into Teams as an app. So you don't have to go outside of Teams to use it, and that makes accessing the information a whole lot easier. Especially, you're rolling this out to all staff. It's not a new system that you need to. You do need to obviously let the customers know or let the staff know that this is how you're going to be managing teams or requesting teams, etc. But it does make the adoption of it a whole lot easier. You have a visual dashboard, and I'm not sure if you can see here on my screen, but you can actually see all the teams you have, and you can see which teams belong to which department, who are the business owners, are they in use or not, and what type of information that might be contained in those individual teams. So just cataloging the information allows for better management of teams. So you know which teams are owned by who, whether they are in use, all those kind of things. And allows the administrators to understand what is happening in the environment. The fact that you can see teams which are active, inactive, and that sort of stuff really helps the customers. They also know who do they need to contact if they want to speak to the business and they want to understand if there's if they're facing any issues with the team, or is it that the project's just finished and that the team is just there and probably needs to be archived, or there's some other issue there. The other key capability our customers really like is the ability to classify the information that I touched on a little bit earlier. Just being able to apply the right level of security and compliance based on the information you're storing in the team is something that customers really, really like. So this is all, and it's the wonderful thing about this is that it's all actually integrated with Office 365 Compliance Center information protection policies. So if you do want to enforce those kind of policies, you have a very, very easy way to do that. So one example, you may be that your team's governance committee decides, or your security officer decides that any team with highly confidential information cannot be accessed through maybe an unmanaged device in the organization, or that guests are not allowed in these teams, or you may want to at least label the files that are being stored in these teams as highly confidential. So the point is that based on the information, based on the type of content you're capturing, we can actually apply a whole range of rules to help you automatically apply some sort of governance to it to start with. The other thing customers really like is the visit-based mechanism of creating teams. So you have a 3-step process for creating a team, and just allows the customers just an easy way to be able to request team. It has workflow approvals built in, so it provides organizations a well-defined process for requesting a team, as well as capturing the information that needs to be provided as part of reviewing, as part of the review process. Pete touched on templates. So that is another key thing. Out of the box, you can go and create templates, but if you want to create templates that go across multiple systems, you may, if you're creating a project, for example, you may want to define your own folder structure. You may want to have some predefined templates already in those folder structures, in those folders. You may want to add, for example, if you're managing a project, you may want to have your budget Excel file template already in there. You might want to have your different phases of the project, those folders automatically created for you. You may be pulling in some financial information from another system, so you may want to have that. If you're using Project Online, you may want to add those tabs, or if you're using Planner for planning information, you may want to add those in your teams. Creating those kind of complete templates where you are actually using multiple systems, and you have a process for managing information within your organization, that's really crucial. So being able to create those templates based on those specific needs of the organization is something we found becomes really handy and makes everybody's life easier. So you don't have to think about, okay, well, if I'm working on a project, what can I do? How do I, you don't need to learn Teams from scratch. You don't need to figure out what tabs do I add? How do I add tabs? What do channels mean? What happens when I store the information? Should I go and use the files tab in there? How do I create my folder structure? Because when you go and create channels in Teams, then that automatically creates the folder structure for you. So having pre-built, well-defined templates based on your needs and rules really helps solve some of the confusion and allows an effective use of the platform. So I wouldn't go through every single thing here. The point is that there are a range of capabilities that are available out of the box that help customers. Like I said before, it's not a silver bullet. It doesn't solve all of the issues. It's definitely not going to solve your people and process issues. So you do need to start look with those. You do need to start with your requirements and your business rules. But if you do want to help get a head start with some of the stuff, that's when Tellus can actually come in and help solve the problem. So that's basically it. That's what we wanted to cover today. Where we have a lot of time to answer some of the questions. So we'll go through the questions now in a minute. But before I do that, one thing I will call out is that we're quite passionate about governance in general, as you could probably imagine. We want to help organizations get their team's implementation right. So they're being more productive and getting most out of teams, as opposed to getting overwhelmed or burdened by the team's environment getting out of control. So as a next step, if you do want to take a step in this direction, we recommend you to start with a Teams health check. It is provided for free to help you get started with this journey, where consultants will go and do a review of your environment, will provide you a report, and then we'll discuss what measures and what things you need to start doing to get the team's environment under control. So we'll just share this link in the chat. We'll also provide this link in the follow-up emails after the webinar, so you have that link handy. And if you're wanting to get a head start with that, feel free to submit that form, and we will be in touch with you shortly. So let's start with questions. Let's have a look at what questions have been asked. I'm just gonna check now. Let's have this few questions here. So let me just go to the top and start these questions. So Jamie, do you need to implement governance before you implement teams, or can I do that later? I think, Peter, you're best to answer this question. I'm also obviously can share my views as well, but I'll pass it on to you if you wanna tackle that question.
Yeah, sure. You can definitely implement governance later. I mean, almost all the people on this call are using Teams already, naturally. So they've got existing teams. So yes, you can come up with a governance plan afterwards. There's just I suppose an aspect of house cleaning to deal with the teams that have been created previously.
Awesome. So I guess the point is you can begin your governance journey whenever. The framework that you described, Peter, still applies. It's just that you've already got an environment with the existing content that needs to be also looked at as part of your existing assessment. But it's definitely, it's never too late. It's actually the sooner you start on this journey, the better. The next question is from Alex. How long does it take to come up with a governance framework? Well, let's say how long is a piece of string question, I guess. But Pete, what are your thoughts on that? What do you feel based on your experiences? How long does it take to get a governance framework in place?
If we were just running governance as a project on its own, that they've gone from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, depending on how complex the rules are, how big the business is. Like you say, it's a piece of string, but it could be as short as a few weeks.
Awesome. Another question from Robin, interesting question. We use Teams on iPads. Would we be better purchasing Surface Pro?
That's a good question. I might be a Microsoft fanboy here, but I'm only in the habit of using my iPhone. Everything else is a Microsoft device. So I find the interface on my iPhone very intuitive for the Teams application. I would only imagine that the iPad interface is the same. If you're using a Surface, that's just like that is a PC. It's got more functionality, or perhaps that functionality is closer, like less clicks away, less taps, because you've got more screen real estate. But I don't think the experience would be vastly different across either device.
And I think the key thing, Robin, if we can maybe, we're happy to touch base with you after the call as well. But is there any specific functionality that you're missing in using iPads? We'd like to just understand that a bit more, so we can actually help you with that decision making. So you can use Teams on iPads and Surface Pro, like Peter mentioned. It can just be experience might be slightly different depending on whether you're using that from a browser or you're using it from an app on iPad, or as opposed to using like a desktop client on Surface Pro, which is going to give you that full capability. Next question. This may be a very detailed question, but is it possible to work in a private channel on a master document and release specific versions to be published at a specific time in public channel? I'm guessing public teams / channels. So to reach out to public channels, for example, as read-only or read/complete versions, keeping the master document controlled by a small group of people. So I'll say, yeah.
This sounds like a very specific implementation of a business requirement that I think could do with some tidying up. So if we were to stand back away from the technology and describe what needs to be achieved in business terms, it sounds like there needs to be a closed ring of people authoring a file. And once that file has been approved or you're happy with it, it goes into a space that's publicly accessible, internally. And a candidate for that would be your intranet. Or if you don't have an intranet, then a public team, and a all company team. But okay, let's keep technology out of it. So a small number of people author a document, they're happy with it, and then publish it to a public space. And in that space, people are only able to download a copy. They can't change that file. They can't change the master file. So that would be what I would see as the definition. There are lots of ways that you could implement that. As I mentioned, you could use your intranet. So you could work on a file in Teams and publish it to your intranet where people could download a copy and fill things out. It might be a company-wide team. I wouldn't do it from a private channel into other channels, but again, this would be something that we'd workshop with you.
Awesome. Thank you, Pete. Just to add to that, I mean, that's just that question is that basically you're describing a business process, and like Pete said, we can obviously take a step back and understand what the business process is, but there are a number of ways you can go and implement business processes like those. That's not a very, I guess, uncommon type of requirement, where you're working on some draft documents. Once they're published, then you want to make it and share it available with the rest of the staff. So you can use flows and Power Apps for that sort of capability that's inbuilt, and you can use those as apps in Teams. But you can also, depending on again what the other requirements are around reporting and those kind of things, you may want to think about whether that's available in SharePoint or various different places. So more than happy to discuss that specific requirement with you in more detail, Roger. Happy to connect with you after the call, so we can discuss that in more detail. Let's move on to the next question. Hector's asking if there's any way to extend governance to applications running inside Teams, such as Forms or Planner. So I'll have a crack at that, Peter, and then feel free to jump in as well. So yes is the answer. When you like I mentioned in at the beginning, when we are thinking about governance on Teams, we cannot look at that just in isolation. We need to think about what different apps and what different workloads are being used, and how do we put appropriate governance in place to manage all of them together. So you can put governance in place broadly that help you not only manage Teams but also Forms and Planner and those kind of things. There are some things that Microsoft provide that's a blanket rule for every service. There are some things in there that allow you to control settings at an individual workload. So depending on what your needs are, what your requirements are, we can configure them. This is one of the requests we're getting on Tellus as well. So we are also looking at expanding the Tellus capability to include other workloads other than Teams. Yeah, watch out for that as well. Peter, did you want to add anything to that question, to that answer?
No. But I can see a couple of other good ones coming in.
Awesome.
Do we do Teams training? Yes, we absolutely do Teams training. Can you create a no? We've done the master file. Can data be stored outside of Microsoft's platforms but shown in Teams? Yes, that's definitely something you can do. Is there?
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Sulab.
No. I was just going to go back to the previous question there regarding training. So, Robin, we do provide all sorts of training, depending on whether it's end user training or administrative training. So we'd be keen to, again, discuss what your requirements are. But in short, like Peter said, we do provide training. And we can actually, the good thing about the training we deliver is that it's not like you sit in a classroom or a virtual classroom these days and then you go through a bunch of exercises. We actually will understand what your needs are, what your stakeholders are, what your end users are like. Are they frontline workers or are they office workers? And then we'll create a custom training plan for you. That can be delivered in, and it doesn't need to be complex, right? It could be something we deliver in a couple of days to, a few days, a few weeks, depending on, again, what size of the workflows, etc. But for a size of 10 people, it should be pretty straightforward and easy. Peter, did you cover this one? Restrict anonymous users from joining meetings?
No, I didn't cover it.
Right. So let's go through this. So if restricting anonymous users from joining meetings is required to allow anyone to join meetings, do you know why does Microsoft Secure Score recommends against it? To me, so from my experience, we do look at the Microsoft Secure Score for a range of different mechanisms quite closely. I mean, I monitor it with my team almost on a daily basis. There are a range of different reasons for it. I don't have an answer specifically to that question, but I can make a note of it and come back to you after having a chat with the team on why that is the case. And we're more than happy to have a chat as well. That's an anonymous question, so we probably, I mean, if you want to put your name in there, we can contact you and come back to you on that. Next question is from Carla. Are there any licensing implications from staff using Tellus? We don't want anything too complicated. Absolutely. So there are no licensing implications for staff using Tellus in a sense that whatever Office 365 licenses you have, that's sufficient. In some cases, depending on whether you want to put some advanced security mechanisms, you may need like an Azure P1 license or like a and you don't even have to buy it for all users, just maybe for one user or so. But the short answer to your question is there are I would say no to minimal license implications. You obviously need to go and license Tellus as a whole, which we can do for you, and then all the staff can actually use it. It is very simple and easy to get up and running. So like I mentioned before, it's an app built into Teams, so it's not complicated at all. You can go and start using it from day one, and obviously the team can also provide additional assistance with further questions that the rest of the staff may have. Moving along. Can you recommend an app for establishing workflows around Office/contracts and engaging with clients, and finally allow legal sign-off on the documents and keep track of the workflow timelines, reminders, dashboards, status reports, etc.? There's a business process implementation, implementation. Peter, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. We come across requirements like this all the time, and I'd refer to this as a mini system. I'm not familiar with any pre-built apps on the Microsoft Store that perform this particular function. Requests like this are rarely satisfied with an off-the-shelf product because everyone has their own twists or little tweaks that they have to the process, or they'd like to have it configurable and so on. What we end up doing is building something either in Teams and or SharePoint, a combination of data collection through forms, some workflows in Power Automate, and a team or a SharePoint site that's internal and then external for people to drop off files or have files approved. So that is quite a complex requirement that is effectively a little system of its own.
Awesome, thank you, Peter. Just to add to that, I mean, to me, it sounds the way I look at it sounds pretty straightforward to me. I mean, you're looking for an approval process. Basically, you publish a document, you have a review of it, then you get the stakeholder from legal to have a look at it. There are a number of inbuilt workflow templates that are available that you may be able to use for that, or you can start from scratch using Flow or Power Automate and actually build those for you. Our team actually do this day in, day out, so we can also help you in that regard. But the other key thing to note is that if this is a specific process that you want to implement for certain types of documents, and Tellus can help you with those kind of things. So if you are creating a team, if you have a team for, or you are looking for an app for approving those kind of requests, again, based on what the request is, we can actually help you in automating that as well. Next question is, in terms of data storage, is there a way to store data outside of Microsoft storage apart from SharePoint?
Yeah, so I answered this one before. Yes, you can include content from other third-party platforms as tabs in team channels. Next question is, can we have Tellus on our intranet, or is it only available in Teams? Sulabh, I think this is one of yours.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, so Tellus can be. I know I showed you Tellus on through the Teams app in the screenshots, but yes, Tellus can be made available through the intranet. You can actually make it available, like if you want to make it available to help desk through a URL, you can do that. You can definitely make it available through the intranet. You can make this you can make it available to a range of different systems that you already use to make it really easy for you to be able to adopt it. All right, we're catching up. So next question is the security of data in the cloud using OneDrive and SharePoint adequate, or do we need additional layer of external data security? Did you want to have a crack at it, Peter?
Microsoft are quite proud of their encryption protocols in Office 365. Office 365 is their biggest revenue source. So they're betting the name of their company on Office 365. So they're very sure about it. There's data redundancy across different data centers within each country. So if there's a disaster recovery scenario, then you just fail over to the next closest data center. So there's no interruption for you. When it comes to encryption and security, then you can bring your own encryption key, making the content that you store in Office 365 opaque to Microsoft. It's not essential, it's definitely something you can do, but Microsoft's encryption and security with data at rest and data at transit is above the industry standard.
So Peter, actually a related question to this is, should you limit the number of personnel with administration status?
I think this comes back to that point about anyone being able to govern teams, and we definitely say yes in terms of the creation of teams. What that is effectively turning off the ability to create Office 365 groups in the central admin and allowing it only for a particular security group. This is what Sulabh mentioned earlier about select users having a premium AD license. So if you use this technique of limiting or installing gatekeepers for the creation of teams, then those few people need a premium AD license. But it's only a handful. It's not everyone using Teams. Tellus stands on top of this, so we stand on the shoulders of Microsoft here. So there's no extra cost in terms of Tellus for that that mechanism or get those gatekeepers in place. But there is the underlying framework that Microsoft provide that does have that cost.
The other thing I think just to add to that, there are obviously various different roles available in Microsoft for administrators. So yes, like Peter said, the standard answer without knowing what your requirements are, what your needs are, would be to yes, do that. But the way you would limit those number of personnel with different administration statuses without inhibiting their ability to do their work would be just a further conversation we'd have with you, and then we'd be able to come back to you with roles we recommend for different personnel to have. So hopefully that helps you, that answers that question there. Next question from Ajit is, what is the base data storage capacity of a team? Can this be controlled? And is it good to control this so that unnecessary data is not stored in Teams?
Okay, well, the Teams data storage the underlying site, SharePoint site, that's used for file storage. So if you go to the Files tab in a Teams channel, what you're looking at are files sitting in SharePoint in a site for that team. You can limit those sites in storage quota artificially. However, people will probably just create new teams or use a different team. So that may not be the stick may not be the best use in that case. You can also see the amount of storage space that a tenant has. You start off with 1 terabyte and you get what is it, 1 gig or 10 gig per user, per licensed user, E1 and above.
Cool. Next question, Dan, what are some of the governance settings we can put in place now? I don't think we have anything on at the moment.
Okay, the top three things that I recommend are turning off Teams creation for a select few, with the exception of a select few people. We've talked about that one. Turning off anonymous access to your tenant, and also limiting sharing from your OneDrive externally. So only allow people to use OneDrive sharing internally. That cuts down on people avoiding Teams and working with external parties out of their personal spaces, which is less governed than a Teams area. So those have been
awesome.
My top three things.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Peter. And obviously we can help implement those kind of things, especially if you don't have anything in place. Tools like Tellus can also help in those scenarios. Conscious of time, we have only about a minute or so left. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining today's session. It's taken an hour out of your time, out of your busy day, so we do really appreciate everybody making the effort to join. I hope you got something out of it. Our details are available and will be provided to you in the email. So feel free to reach out to us at any point in time for further discussion on any of the topics or any of the questions you have. We're more than happy to catch up with you after the session as well. So thank you again for joining the session. Thank you, Peter, for making the time out today. Really appreciate your time as well. And thank you to Ivy for helping us organize this event. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.